Hello, everyone. It's my privilege and joy to be here again with my friend Andrew Harvey. And one of the things we want to consider with you this morning is the topic of intimacy, which we wrote about extensively in Radical Regeneration. And I would just like to take a moment to read a paragraph from that book defining intimacy, because we need to know exactly what we mean by intimacy. And then I'll turn it over to my dear friend Andrew. Here's the paragraph. For us, the doorway into the birthing field is none other than intimacy in all of its forms and in all realms. We define intimacy as authentic seeing and being seen that leads to communion and the profound knowledge that only communion in love can engender. Some have used the expression into me see as a playful description of openness to mutual intimacy. As elders, we have come to understand that this radical and luminous intimacy with all things and all beings, from the tiniest flea to the whale to the serial killer and the most corrupt politician, is what everyone in their deepest core desires, despite the ego's ferocious resistance. It is this lack of intimacy in our world that breeds dissociation, despair, and the kinds of arrogant, divisive, and ignorant actions that lead to our destruction. As Rumi writes, out beyond ideas of right and wrong doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. That field is intimacy. And when we are in humble and illumined relationship with that field, unimaginable new possibilities can flower. So on this next edition of Elderspeak, Andrew, please speak.
This is one of the most precious things about our book for me,
Yeah.
because it came out of remembering three words by a great Japanese mystic, Durgan. Enlightenment is intimacy.
Yes.
And those three words have ricocheted through my entire life and continue to expand. What we're living in is a culture driven mad by separation and by dissociation
Yes.
and by fantasy and by a terrifying lack of intimacy between people, profound alienation leading to violence and
Yeah.
disgusting denunciations and demonizations of others. And when you really see how appallingly lethal this dissociation is, and if anybody can't see it at this moment in American history, they really do need to go to an eye doctor. If you really look at it, it seems overwhelming until you remember that every single being is born, as all the mystical traditions proclaim, with divine consciousness. And that if you really work humbly with different kinds of practices, whatever practices really enthrall you and infuse you with joy, you will come into what the mystics call the space of the heart. And you will be given experiences of such radical intimacy, both with the source of all things and all things that stream from the source, that your understanding of what love is will immeasurably expand. And the energy that that understanding gives you to stand up for justice, to stand up for compassion, to stand up for inclusiveness, to stand up for truth, the energy that you'll be given from that intimacy will astound you. This has been my experience. It's not something I wrote about in a book. It's something that I have lived and try to live ever more expansively every single day, because I know that in this worldwide global dark night explosion of dissociation, radical intimacy with all things and the sacred activism that must be born from that are the God-given antidotes.
Yes. Well, in our book, we wrote about the 8 rays of intimacy. Shall we go into
I
that?
would love that. If you'd
Okay.
read those, it would be so helpful, I think.
Well, we can go piece by piece. So I'll
Yes.
just read the first one. Intimacy with the real, the absolute, or if you prefer, the divine. In the last stages of the mystical path, this becomes the conscious realization of the self in which all worlds and processes are contained. And here's that wonderful quote from the Upanishads, which has been one of my favorite for all of my adult life. I am that, you are that, all this is that. Just such a statement of there's nothing from which we are separate. And in this time of, everyone's talking about the division between people, between cultures, between races, between parties. We're talking about unity, unity. We have to start from I am that divine, you are that divine. All of this is divine and we are interconnected.
It's a very exalted understanding. And although it is the truth, we've been deeply blocked from that truth by the lack of the mystical realities and disciplines being available. But there's no more excuse because they are now available. And what happens at the higher stages of mystical illumination is that you see the divine light, you see the white light. And this white light is the light of your own inmost consciousness. And when you see it, you know that it is the foundation of all reality and that all reality is being emanated from it, and that everything that you call matter is actually crystallized light energy. There is one light manifesting through an unknowable mystery, millions of worlds and millions of sentient beings and millions of things. So that's the recognition that is at the core of all of the great mystical traditions. And they when those recognitions that the light makes possible are part of your ordinary experience, you live an experience of radical interconnection with everything normally. This is the highest level. But many, many people can have glimpses of that level and do have
Sure.
glimpses of that
Mhm.
level.
Yeah.
And it's very important, I believe, to take the testimony of the greatest mystics, all of whom agree, because that gives you something to strive for, a touchstone of truth by which to judge your thoughts, your actions, and to permeate them with the compassion that that realization brings.
Absolutely. And that was the first ray of intimacy. I am
Yes.
that, thou art that, all this is that. And then the second ray is intimacy with your own unique expression of the higher self or the divine within you. As you grow on the spiritual path, this intimacy expands in amazing ways to embrace more and more of creation. So as we realize, and maybe first it's just an intellectual reality, but then it grows to understand what that really means on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment level.
That's it. And it's a very subtle realization, and it grows in a wonderful way because what you come to understand is that although everything is an emanation of that vast light, that light also takes form as you to have a unique experience of itself, which it couldn't have without you claiming the unique texture, the unique vibrancy, the unique brilliance, the unique sweetness, the unique pain, the unique struggle of your own particular expression of that universal reality. And that is a huge revelation because then you come to understand that everything that you are experiencing in the tiniest details of your ordinary life are experiences that you're having as an expression of eternal reality and are part of the unfolding of that reality. And that gives an enormous beauty and an enormous richness to the texture of life because it reveals that it is a sacred manifestation.
And so the third ray is intimacy with the secret, sacred self of all created beings, witnessing it and encouraging it to emerge wherever we can, even in those who seem lost in dark and dangerous choices. So in other words, we can bask in this intimacy that we feel within ourselves toward the divine, toward nature, toward others. But then our work is to witness it in others and encourage it to emerge wherever we can, even in people who seem completely clueless to what this is all about.
I love that because I think a lot of modern spirituality is extremely narcissistic. You know,
Yeah.
and I know that the New Age has been a long orgy of the kind of narcissism that is actually contributing to this terrifying crisis instead of healing it. So, after those first two categories, we put in categories of responsibility because once you've woken up to your inherent intimacy with all things, you have to listen to the voice that says, well, what are you going to do with this revelation? How are you going to live? And how you must live. And I think the mystical systems are absolutely in agreement in this,
Mhm.
is that you must live so as to encourage and empower others as much as possible.
Yes.
And that is a constant challenge and a constant invitation, and it requires great discipline of love. And it
Mhm.
requires also clearing away in you all the tendencies to withdraw from uncomfortable, difficult people so
Mhm.
that you can stay in the state of radical intimacy with all beings. And if you do, you'll find strange and wonderful opportunities to reach out to people in ways that wouldn't be possible without that commitment. And as we face the terrible divisions exploding in our country, and all over the world, and the lust for authoritarian government and the lust to demonize all kinds of people who don't agree with you, which could potentially engender an even greater crisis, which could potentially end the world. That's how serious it is. We must evolve this radical inner intimacy with the source and with ourselves so that we can start being agents of the field of intimacy that can bring over time real unity and real possibility to life. That's so important now.
The
You
next,
agree with that, Carolyn? You feel that?
oh, I absolutely do. And the next array of intimacy, which is extremely important, is intimacy with your own human self and your
Right.
conditioning and your wounding. And I don't mean that we, as we wrote this, we don't mean that we're wallowing in our wounding, but rather become familiar with our conditioning, both personally and culturally, and then develop intimacy with your body and your sacred sexuality. And this is where the fullness of our humanity can really come through. We get familiar with our wounding, but we also become familiar with the body, and the body needs to be healed, and our sexuality needs to be healed and made sacred as well.
This is a huge subject, but I think the key to this, and we say this in the book, is the relationship with the mother aspect of God,
Divine
the
mother.
embodied Godhead. We've had a long, long, tragic obsession with the transcendent alone and devalued
Yes.
nature, relationships, this world, the body. That has been a disaster, and it's part of the reason why we're now destroying everything. And as
Absolutely.
part of the healing of that disaster, it's very important through intimacy with yourself to develop an understanding how all human beings are fighting inner demons, terrible conditioning, deep scars, deep karmic dramas. We're all involved in this. And that breeds compassion. And even more profoundly, when you start to get into connection with the mother force that is creating out of the light everything and living in everything as everything, you come to truly bless this body that has been so denigrated and so battered by the different philosophies. And you start to find ways of realizing that you are a living temple of divine consciousness and that every cell of your body is conscious. And that changes your whole experience.
Absolutely.
And when that becomes more and more available to you, a wholly new vision of what sexuality can be is also given to you. And you understand that the task isn't to deny sexuality, it's to consecrate it, to sanctify it, to divinize it, to flood it with energies of divine passion and compassion. And then sexuality becomes a kind of worship, a,
Yes.
a way of adoration, which is its own initiatory path, as the great tantrics, both in Buddhism and Hinduism, knew, as the great Taoist alchemists knew, as the Kabbalists knew, the secret mystics who were working on this transfiguration process of the whole being. This sounds very grand, but you can, if you start with cultivating intimacy and really privileging it, you come to understand that your desires are stammering words of a deeper speech that is longing to be released in you, the speech of true intimate love. And when sexuality becomes the expression of true intimate love, great miracles are possible between people and great healings become available.
Well, the next ray is something I have quite a bit to say about.
Go
um,
for it.
okay. Um, the next ray is intimacy with nature and the cosmos. And here's a little quote from Kabir: all the stars and rivers are in you. And this is really challenging, even though it sounds simple. And oh well, I'll just go for a walk in the park. This is much more than that. This is realizing that you are nature. And this is difficult because of our conditioning to dominate nature. The whole Christian tradition in the West has been about conquest, power over, and dominating nature. I have a little story I like to tell sometimes. My father never saw a tree that he didn't want to cut down. He was always going around, well, this tree is in the way. This tree is in the way. It obstructs my vision. It's this, it's that. Let's get out the chainsaw. And I think that's so inherent, especially in white males in Western culture, is control and domination over nature. And the glory of intimacy is when we open up and have this heartfelt, body felt experience of intimacy with nature.
And it really changes everything, doesn't it, Carolyn? Because
Does,
then you realize that we have no right to impose our feverish, hubristic dreams of domination on this gorgeous, sacred world.
yes.
We will only be able to go forward in our current disaster if we truly humble up and start learning, as we both have tried to do, from the indigenous traditions who live in this astounding intimacy and who respect all life. Even when they hunt, they pray to the creatures they have to kill to survive on, to be gracious enough to give them what they need and don't take more than what they need. And there are so many examples of the wisdom that that intimacy brings in a relationship with nature, a wisdom that we catastrophically ignore now.
Yeah.
Just this
Yeah.
morning, I was watching the news, the BBC News, and very painfully, I felt the horror of what's really going on in the climate, which is that greenhouse gases are getting even more alarming this year than they were in 2019. And although there's so much noise about us coming together to do something about it, and Bill Gates has written a book about saving the climate, you and I know that hardly anything real is happening because not enough people have had this revelation of intimacy that would lead to nothing less than a revolution of all of the economic and political structures, a quick and fast revolution, which is what we need to have any hope at all of surviving in a livable world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you mentioned animals a second ago, and here's the next ray, intimacy.
Yes.
Intimacy with animals and what we call the divine animal within, on which we expounded, of course, in our book, Saving Animals from Ourselves. So this intimacy with animals, and I'm experiencing this right now with my dog, Sammy, who's really declining. And it's kind of like I feel like I'm in hospice with him, because every day there's this communion between us as I see him declining and kind of getting farther away from this life. It is an intimacy that I would not trade for anything. But we need this intimacy with animals everywhere, because they teach us things that we could never learn in books or anywhere else.
Oh, you know how much I love my cat. And
Yes, yes.
I think for me, the most profound lesson that she teaches me of intimacy is how to slow down completely
Yes,
and be alive to the blissful tenderness of each moment with her.
yes, yes,
And when I'm humble enough and quiet enough to enter into the space in which she exists, I experience myself in a completely different way.
isn't that
Very loving and very embodied and utterly happy with just what is.
yeah,
And that is so close to what Dogen means when he says enlightenment is
yeah,
intimacy,
it is.
that I've come to see that my cat is, with the Dalai Lama and Bede Griffiths, one of my supreme teachers.
Absolutely.
And you and I know that if human beings could truly get to that radiant acknowledgement of what animals are offering us by their presence, by their courage, by their passion, by their beauty,
Yes,
this terrifying genocide of the animals, we've really created a worldwide Auschwitz in which we're torturing whole species to death, a million species on the edge of extinction. That would never anymore be possible. So when we're talking about intimacy like this is not a game we're playing. We haven't put this at the end of our book because we thought we had to think of something to give hope to people. We have experienced this, and we know that this intimacy in all of these different ways are the antidotes to what is now a suicidal and matricidal civilization. We know that's why it's such an urgent and passionate theme for us, isn't it?
yes, absolutely. And the next array, of course, is intimacy with lovers and spouses that arises as we cultivate a deep honoring of their sacred self. And so, if one is in a relationship, you really can't be in a meaningful relationship without seeing into and honoring the divine within the other person. And part of the pledge and the vow of a marriage commitment or any long-term commitment is to deeply honor the divine within that other person, to nurture it and celebrate it with that other.
When I got married to Eric, we used the old 17th century marriage service, which has a lovely vow. And the vow is, with my body I thee worship.
Mm.
With my body, I thee worship. And that says it all. And there again, we're not playing when we're talking about this, because imagine what is obvious to everybody with half a brain, the terrible dysfunction of family life that we see all around us. How that would be healed if the two people who come together to make a family constantly remember that they're in a divine communion, an alchemy of intimacy, which they need to truly focus on and truly rededicate themselves to, so as to make available to the children in the household the atmosphere of that radiant intimacy they share. Imagine the healing that that would bring to millions of beings.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. The next ray is intimacy with sacred friends and collaborators and those who midwife our own birth and theirs. So, obviously, as we as we more deeply experience intimacy as part of our relationship with the sacred, the divine, we naturally are drawn to and draw to us sacred friends and collaborators and those who midwife our own birth and theirs. And Andrew, I just want to say that, I see you as one of these treasured sacred friends and
Thank you.
collaborators that I have in my life, who so inspires me, who so supports and loves me. And this is the quality of intimacy that I want to have in my life.
Back at you, kid. Thank you, darling, for all the marvelous hours we've spent together.
Yes,
And what I think our relationship shows is what this sacred intimacy can produce. It produced 4 books.
yes,
It produced the, the concretization of our mutual visions in a vision that goes beyond them both.
yes,
So, this kind of sacred intimacy between friends is crucial for the future of the planet, because it gives us a wholly new inroad into a wholly new kind of creativity. Up
absolutely.
to now, we've had this vision of the creator being the lonely, stoic,
Right.
struck by lightning on mountaintops. And there is a truth to that. The great prophets have been initiated like that. But we're coming into an age where sacred collaboration is essential for the revelation of new forms of radical transformative creativity. And I'm hoping that we model that, but I'm hoping too that people who are inspired by this vision of intimacy will truly start looking for their sacred friends and doing things together that will stretch them as we've been stretched
Absolutely.
into new realms and new possibilities. That has to be the foundation of any possible future, doesn't it?
It certainly does. Certainly does. And the last ray, the eighth ray of intimacy, is intimacy with all those throughout the world called to practice sacred activism with us, whether we know them or not, through encouragement, support, and prayer. And I feel
Mm,
as I, as a sacred activist, do my work in the world, I feel people all around the world who love and support me. And it really, really makes my work meaningful and inspires me and gives me passion. And I support their work as well, and this wonderful network, which we have to admit has been enhanced by the pandemic, that has put us all on Zoom, instead of having in-person meetings. It's really been a gift in terms of having this sense of the world as our work and as our friends.
beautifully said. And but there is another side to it, and I've experienced, and I know you do that side, because our consciousness is now global.
Yes,
And because in our separate rooms, we are connected to everything that's exploding in the world.
yeah,
What I've been experiencing is what you described, but I've also experienced a new level of anguished compassion for those who are brave enough to stand up in impossible circumstances. I'm thinking of two examples. I'm thinking of Navalny
Yeah,
going back to Russia,
yes,
knowing that Putin was going to put him into prison, but having to do that because he knew that his example would inspire the kind of resistance that could, in the end, restore democracy in Russia. When you really feel that, as I and so many others have been feeling that, all you can do in the position we're in is pour out prayer and pour out inner support to him, which is what I've been doing. And I'm just hoping beyond hope that there are hundreds of thousands of people just holding Navalny in our deepest prayer so that he can somehow find the courage to keep his flame of resistance alive. And I believe in the power of the inner worlds. So I
yes,
don't think this is a pointless activity. I think this is what you could call inner sacred activism.
yes,
And the second example is what's happening in Myanmar. I went to Burma in the 1980s when the military was in control. And although it was a very repressive society, I did meet the Burmese people in their hearts and in their extraordinary tenderness and gentleness and sweetness. And that was a permanent memory of
mhm,
beautiful people. And to see their courage
yeah,
going out with nothing against the soldiers to
yeah,
cry out for freedom,
yes,
that has convulsed my heart. But again, instead of going into paralysis about it, I really bring the full force of my prayer to focus on them and send along the invisible webs of our interconnected, totally intimate world invisible strength and succor and support and compassion and passion.
yeah,
And I encourage everybody out there to do this because you might feel, oh my God, what can I do? Well, you can do something really powerful. You can pray and you can really focus the deepest hungers of your heart for a new world in prayer on those who are brave enough to be standing up against impossible odds to birth it.
absolutely.
And that is a form of radical intimacy. But
Yeah,
it does mean that you have to open your heart
yes,
in
yes,
a way that you cannot close it again. And that if you do, you will suffer because you'll see what's at stake in the world and you'll be moved beyond imagining by the courage of those who dare to stand up for that stake. And you'll have to engage with it
yeah,
in the inner levels and the outer levels.
absolutely. Well, Andrew, do you think that we should complete our conversation with this wonderful quote from Rumi on intimacy?
Yes.
Okay.
That quote, my favorite, one of my favorite quotes from Rumi. I never stops being the most inspiring, imaginable encouragement to intimacy.
Rumi writes or speaks or transmits the following. He says, adore and love the one with your whole being, and the one will reveal to you that each thing in the universe is a vessel full to the brim with wisdom and beauty. Each thing the one will show you is a drop from the boundless river of infinite beauty. Thank you for this conversation, Andrew. It's such a joy to talk about all of this with you.